Hi everyone, I'm Rob King and welcome to this video, which is a bit of a detour into yeast harvesting, yeast washing, and of course then creating a yeast starter for reuse. Now this is the second time I've tried this. The first time was unsuccessful and I just dumped it. This time though, I'm very happy to report just exactly how well it all went. Let's check it out. Step one for yeast washing. First we've got to get rid of the trub, which means giving this a good shake. Try and make sure we get as much of that as possible. I may add a little extra water because some of that's not coming off. Right, I'm going to cover this 30 minutes and then we're going to move to separate vessels. We're going to transfer the washed yeast into kilner jars. To begin with then though, we need to sterilise them with boiling water. Now theoretically what we're looking for here is this to separate into 3 layers. There's some just wort at the top and the trub at the bottom, and then the yeast in suspension in the middle. Now we gave it plenty of time, but I just don't think there was any trub left at the bottom to really particularly remove. So we're just going to tip off that top layer of liquid and take the yeast into the kilner jars. We're now going to move these jars to the fridge where the colder temperature will allow the yeast to start to drop out to the bottom. 8 hours later and you can see that separation nice and clearly. To create a yeast starter we first need to dissolve 100 grams of DME in 1 litre of bottled water and simmer for 15 minutes. We are also going to mix in 10 grams of GoFirm. This is a yeast nutrient that really helps the starter get going. I'm going to use a demijohn to mix up the starter in, and of course it's all fully sanitized before we begin. Now the wort needs to cool down to room temperature before we pitch in that yeast. It has been a whole month since I harvested that yeast. I thought it would be a good idea to get the yeast out at the same time, but what happened is the warmer temperature started to activate the yeast and it all mixed back up, so I had to revert to jar number 2. The yeast has settled to the bottom of the jar, so I can remove that top layer and then give the bottom layer a good shake to make sure it's all mixed in so it's easy to transfer into my yeast starter. Since I don't have a stirring plate, the process was every time I walked past the demijohn, I just gave it a good shake. And again, and again, and again. 24 hours later, brew day was coming to an end and it was time to transfer that yeast starter into the wort. Now this was my original bitter and more on that later, but it did turn out absolutely wonderfully. One of my favourite brews of the year. It therefore comes as absolutely no surprise that of course I harvested the yeast all over again. However, I did make a little mistake this time around because I didn't wash the yeast. Also, when I put it to one side, it once again did not separate out into the 3 layers, and I still believe it's because I just do not have a lot of trub left over because I use a hop spider. Here we are just a week later and it has separated out. Now I could, if I wanted to, yeast wash it at this point. However, I'm just going to leave it as one of my Gen 2 yeast harvests. My final thought on this topic is I may just be using jars that are a little too big, and I do have more yeast than I actually need. I'll continue to think about that, but I now have definitely caught that bug of yeast harvesting and yeast washing and yeast reuse, and I'll certainly be doing more of it in the future. Thanks for watching everybody, happy homebrewing, cheers!